Hello. It's a good way to start any video, I think. I am going to watch and react, talk, commentate, and just enjoy this um, piece of video. I'm going to show a couple different pieces of this longer video, and the full video will be available in the description. But I am going to, I guess I could say what I'm talking about. I'm going to talk about free will. I think free will is um, a hard thing to demonstrate, to measure, to prove. Just like I think determinism is another hard thing to prove definitively. I think that science and our ability to um, deduce and understand cause and effect has led to the belief that um, everything can be reduced to a prior knowable action, and that there aren't starts and stops to cause and effect chains. That it's just it's all events are determined by their prior causes. And I think that that's something that determinists haven't quite proved yet. I also think that determinism is typically brought forth by people who believe who don't believe in God, and to me, determinism is essentially like a type of um, fate system. Like if everything's determined, then if we knew all the prior causes and all the states of matter and how they move and what they're going to do, then we would know everything that's going to happen in the future. And that to me is a type of fate. And the only way that fate exists is if things are preordained by some type of all knowing God. So I think it's more of a argument for God if there's determinism, and yet most of the people who think of determinism are atheists. So it's just an interesting dichotomy that I like to think about. Um, but I think free will is a real thing. I think that we make decisions. I think we could have done other things. I think we think of and predict the future, and we work. We create new causes. We become a cause in and of ourselves, and we create new events that could have been different if we had chosen differently, and we rationalize and plan and create hierarchies um, of decision making. And I think that our consciousness is a tool that allows us to hold these different potential futures in our mind and play them out. And I think that when we um, uh, reason ourselves into behaviors, that is essentially what we mean by free will. Um, I don't think that we have like entirely libertarian free will. I don't think we can do whatever we want whenever we want. We are definitely limited by certain reactions, instincts, automatic systems, automatic behaviors, and free will is only in place in certain situations, um, and there are ways to be better and worse at utilizing our own will, and um, certain aspects like intellect, self control, and um, rationale can go into having better free will, and more information can help with increasing the ability to enact free will or to exercise free will. Um, so I like to watch videos about determinism and free will and the debate, but I'm an atheist, so I don't believe in God, and I don't believe that He has created free will for us. I think that free will is um, a way to describe our ability to weigh decisions, and then we are responsible for the actions that we take based on those decisions. As far as the moral arguments for free will, a lot of people think if we don't have free will, we can't be moral, or there's no reason to hold people responsible. But that's a kind of different thing as to whether or not it exists or not. And I think that we have to hold people responsible even if they're not engaging in free will, or they're not completely in control of their actions. But then there are certain times when they could have made better choices or different choices or whatever, and we hold them responsible for those choices as well. So it isn't a all or nothing type situation. It's a contingent situation. So I'm going to watch this video because it's my favorite theory on how free will works. It's my favorite refutation of determinism. And I want to share it and to talk about free will in general. So I'm going to play just two little pieces from this longer video, and it's from I don't actually know his name. It's from the YouTube channel Absolute Philosophy. So I can show you what that looks like here. This is the YouTube channel here, and let's go ahead and start watching it.
We do not because we want to, but we do it for other reasons. The question of free will then comes down to whether or not we can have control over the reasons for which we do things. And in my opinion, yes we can. When we deliberate about action, we consider all the various reasons we have for doing something or for not doing it. And then we choose to act based on some of those reasons. Now, saying this is all well and good, but how does this process work, and how does this provide an explanation for our decisions? Well, to answer these important questions, I'm going to need to put forward my own free will theory, and it's this theory that I'm going to defend against objections in later sections. To provide a full theory of how this process works would actually get quite technical and would go beyond the scope of this video. But fortunately, there are two excellent articles on how this process of deciding for reasons works, one by Robert Kane and the other by Donald Davidson, and I've linked them in the description. For now, I'll just outline my theory and how it differs from the ones I've just mentioned. My account of free will falls into the category of being an event-causal libertarian theory. The event-causal bit means that I think causation is something that holds between events. And the libertarian theory of it means that I think our decisions, which are events, were not causally determined by events in the past. So then, my free will account rejects a view called causal determinism, which basically says that every event has been caused by some event in the past. Now, the supposed clash between free will and causal determinism is an absolutely huge topic within the free will debate, and I'm going to be looking at it in a detailed way in the following sections. But first, I'm interested in accounting for two other features of free will. Number one, the fact that our decisions to act could have been otherwise, and number two, the fact that our decisions to act can be rationally explained. To do this, let's pick a simple example. Suppose I have a decision to make, say about whether to go on holiday to Spain or to Italy. I consider the reasons I have for going to Spain, perhaps for the beaches and architecture. I also consider the reasons I have for going to Italy, perhaps for the wine and historic sites. At some point I decide to act, and I do so by choosing to act upon certain reasons, and the reasons I choose become the reasons for that decision. If I decide to go to Spain, then I decide to go to Spain because of the beaches and architecture. If I decide to go to Italy, then I decide to go to Italy because of the wine and historic sites. So then, my decision to act has two aspects to it: the reasons that I choose and the choice of those reasons. The reasons I choose provide the motivational or simple explanation for my decision, whichever it is, one that locates that decision within a context in which it rationally fits. For example, suppose I decide to go to Spain. In reply to the question, why did you decide to go to Spain? I can respond by saying, because of Spain's beaches and architecture. But the reasons alone can't provide a contrastive explanation for my decision. For that, I must emphasize the decision's choice aspect. For example, in reply to the question, why did you go to Spain rather than Italy? I can respond by saying, because I chose Spain's beaches and architecture over Italy's wine and historic sites. So then, the choice and reasons can together provide both a simple and contrastive explanation of my decision. And in both cases, the explanation resides entirely within the decision itself, as two aspects of it. The decision is, therefore, rational and self-explaining. Note that the choice of the reasons is not some act that precedes the decision. Rather, it is the non-rational aspect of the decision act itself, the aspect that constitutes pure will. The rationality of the decision is provided by the reasons for that decision, i.e. the reasons chosen, which are not the same as reasons for that choice. There are no reasons for the choice, as it is not an act. The account I have just provided accommodates both features of free will I set out to explain. Number 1. As long as you had reasons to do otherwise, you could have decided to do otherwise by choosing those reasons. And number 2. Your decision can be simply and contrastively explained by the reasons chosen.
Only 3% of players can master in this game.
Ugh.
Finally, by providing an account of free will that locates the ultimate source of action in your decision to act, the sorted conception of free will is accommodated too.
So I'm just gonna look at this real quick. The fact that we could have decided to act otherwise, yes, because we have choice of reasons. So we have thought about the different characteristics of a decision and what it might lead to, and then we can choose between the two. The fact that our decision can be rationally explained, which is the part where it has to be, there has to be contrast, there has to be two or more options, and that's what the second part is about, and then it is in with us. So that's the personal part of that. I think the only thing that's slightly confusing is when he said that the choice itself wasn't an act. I want to listen to that again.
Rather, it is the non-rational aspect of the
Yeah,
decision act itself, the aspect that constitutes pure will.
The non-rational aspect.
The rationality of the decision is provided by the reasons for that decision, i.e. the reasons chosen, which are not the same as reasons for that choice. There are no reasons for the choice, as it is not an act.
There are no reasons for the choice itself. So it's like, I don't fully grasp that concept. There are no reasons for the choice because they're two different things. You create these kind of passive reasons, which are your expectations of the future, and then you choose one of those. But I think that in the choosing, there's embedded some type of prioritization or value system or additional reasoning, and I think that's not being talked about here. And then when you actually act on that, that's your like final utilization of the system of decision making, and that's the freedom comes in because you have freedom to make one choice over the other. But I guess he's saying that you don't actually have the freedom to you just make a choice between options, but that's mysterious. I'm not sure. I'm a little bit confused.
The account I have just provided accommodates both features of free will I set out to explain. Number 1. As long as you had reasons to do otherwise, you could have decided to do otherwise by choosing those reasons. And number 2. Your decision can be simply and contrastively explained by the reasons chosen. Finally, by providing an account of free will that locates the ultimate source of action in your decision to act, the sorted conception of free will is accommodated too. One final thing to note. This account doesn't mean that all our decisions to act are cases of free will. Consider, for example, the ice cream case O'Connor mentioned. If you are presented with a choice between vanilla and chocolate ice cream, it may well be that you simply have no reason to choose vanilla. In which case, since all the reasons available to choose would result in a decision to eat chocolate, you cannot decide otherwise, and it's not a free decision. And with my own free will account explained, it's time to defend it. So then, since I defend free will, what about the big problem, the issue of determinism?
Okay, so that is a quick overview of his general theory. When given a choice between two options, we create reasons for each option, and then we decide between those two things. And it doesn't require that you go deeper into those decisions, because the fact that you could have chosen a different um, a different option is a type of freedom. And because you could have done something else, it isn't determined. So it's a refutation of determinism. There's no prior cause that determined that you would make one choice over the other. At least not one that is measurable or knowable. So that's interesting. And then he also says that because there's rationality to it and constraints, and I would add things like value, and I guess it depends on how deep you go into decision making, and weigh pros and cons, because that's always a more or less complex scenario. But in the simple terms, you are free, and you're weighing different. I don't really know how to read that little freedom slash constraints rational. Like it's weighing the options. So let's look at the last part here, because that's another thing I want to go over.
That free will is the basis upon which we understand causation. So without free will, causation itself is unintelligible. The ironic thing about pitting causation against free will is that causal reasoning is intimately tied up with our experience of deciding to act for reasons. So causation as an idea could never properly threaten free will. Here's why. Our direct encounter with causation is in our experience of the connection between our decisions, actions, and the consequences of those actions. This connection then gets projected out onto the world to explain other events. In deliberation, we use causal reasoning as follows. We consider the certain decisions we might make, and then we treat those decisions as an uncaused cause at the start of a causal chain, and use causal reasoning to determine what the consequences of that action would be. Then, based on the supposed effects of those decisions, we form beliefs about the likely consequences of our actions to help us choose what to do. You may notice that this is quite similar to the account that I put forward about free will. For example, if I were considering whether to buy my son a toy sword or a toy gun, I might start from those decisions and use causal reasoning to decide what the likely consequences would be. If I buy him the toy sword, that would likely result in bruises on my legs, because I'll probably get a few wallops. If I decide to buy him the gun, that might result in my wife's vase getting smashed by a stray bullet. When I consider the possible consequences, of course I'd choose to buy him the sword. Further, it's only because of the circumstances of this causal reasoning that we assume the priority of cause over effect. When we deliberate about action, we take our decision as an uncaused cause, and then reason to the effects. But those effects depend on that decision. The decision is under our control, and whether or not the effects occur depends on which decision we actualize.
I'm gonna rewatch that real quick. just to get an idea of it.
This connection then gets projected out onto the world to explain other events. In deliberation, we use causal reasoning as follows. We consider the certain decisions we might make, and then we treat those decisions as an uncaused cause at the start of a causal chain, and use causal reasoning to determine what the consequences of that action would be. Then, based on the supposed effects of those decisions, we form beliefs about the likely consequences of our actions to help us choose what to do. You may notice that this is quite similar to the account that I put forward about free will. For example, if I were considering whether to buy my son a toy sword or a toy gun, I might start from those decisions and use causal reasoning to decide what the likely consequences would be. About action, we take our decision as an uncaused cause, and then reason to the effects. But those
Take our decision as an uncaused cause and then reason to the effects of that.
effects depend on that decision. The decision is under our control, and whether or not the effects occur depends on which decision we actualize.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of what I think is occurring and why free will can be why we can use the term free will is because of this notion of a beginning of a causal chain that we first conceptualize and then enact, and because there's a decision to be made, which can be troubling, but at some point we act, and that's what I would call free will. So I'm just going to continue on here. Sorry for that interjection.
So in causal reasoning for action, the cause is prior to the effect, because the cause is our decision, which is under our control, and the existence of the effect depends on it. So our understanding of causes being prior to their effects is a mere artifact of our deliberation in contexts of free will. Returning to the toy example, whether I end up with bruises on my leg depends on whether I buy my son a sword. But whether I buy my son a sword only depends on my decision. Causal thinking is thus, first and foremost, a heuristic that we deploy in our decision-making processes. If the consequences of our decisions were not somewhat predictable, then we could never act rationally so as to actualize our intentions. At the same time, we recognize that causal reasoning isn't perfect. Things can work out really well in our heads, but the world refuses to play nice. Maybe I buy my son the sword, but my wife's vase ends up getting smashed anyway. Nevertheless, as we so regularly use causal thinking to work out the consequences of our actions, and because we also see the same kind of regularity out in the world, we project the same causal process out into the world in order to explain the events we perceive. The idea that causal reasoning begins with free will matches the kind of history of causal thinking that we see in the world too. It's very natural for our ancestors, when projecting this same causal process into the world, to assume that it too was driven by will. We see them recognize gods of various sorts out in the world and think that the causation that's experienced is a result of the will of those gods. Later, as the connections in the world were seen to be more regular and predictable than our own, and as our technology increased, it was natural for us to see cause and effect relations in mechanistic terms instead. But then science moved on from causal notions completely and turned to the precise language of mathematics for its explanations. But they seem to have left several philosophers behind, sitting on a causal branch trying to saw it off from the free will tree that supports it. Given this, the notion of an uncaused cause is wired into our primitive understanding of a causal chain. All causal reasoning has to start somewhere, and we began this process when considering our own actions. So, far from being a mystery, the idea that our decisions would be an uncaused cause is the most natural idea in the world. I have now dealt with what I take to be the biggest philosophical objections to free will, but before I end, I have a few final comments. I have dealt with free will purely from a metaphysical perspective. I haven't attempted to go into the connection between free will and moral responsibility. I can only do so much in a single video, and these discussions would take me too far afield. I have also ignored supposed evidence against free will from other sciences, like neuroscience or psychology. As far as I can tell, these objections either rely on a materialist view of the universe that I reject, or they talk about factors that influence our decisions. Now, I'm happy to say that our decisions are influenced by a variety of factors. All I say is that our decisions have our source in us and that we could have done otherwise, and therefore we have free will. So with the main reasons to deny free will dealt with, I think we have overwhelming reasons to accept that we have free will. Free will is a deep intuition, is the basis of our ideas of moral responsibility, is crucial to the notion of meaning, and is experienced in a direct and intimate way in every waking moment of our life. I would even say that our direct and regular experience of freely deciding to act is a datum that any universal theory must accommodate. If you present a universal theory that can't accommodate it, so much the worse for your theory. But granting this, several accounts of free will are possible. I have presented to you what I think is the most compelling theory, one that solves the free will problem with elegance and allows the scientific program to run alongside it. Now, this video certainly took a lot of work, so if you enjoyed...
Okay. So yeah, check out his videos. He's really good. I I didn't look at those papers that he recommended and read them or anything. So there's some deeper uh, uh, theories on decision making that I am not going to talk about because I don't know about them as well. Because I come at free will from a very kind of just internal, personal thinking. Um, and maybe that's not the best thing to do. I've definitely heard a lot of deterministic arguments, and um, I'm just not convinced that that's accounting for all behavior is just prior physics and determinism, and it can all be explained if you had a strong enough computer or something. Um, I think it is theoretically impossible to predict the future perfectly, even with as much information as we can gather. I think there's always going to be some amount of unpredictability and randomness, as well as um, the acceptance of the idea of causal chains that start and stop. Um, and I like his um, kind of psychological approach to explaining the idea of causation coming from our um, experiences of decision making and free will and choices and rationalizing and predicting the future. And I think that that's all what we do. I think that that is certainly an important aspect of our behavior and our life and and a big part of what we call consciousness. And so uh, I'm happy to attribute it to a fundamental human aspect. And I like that he talks about that. I think he's one of the first people I saw talk about it in that way. And that's just because I probably haven't looked into positive arguments for free will, because I was already like, well, I believe in free will. I just couldn't figure out how to justify it, especially because I am a materialist, so it's a bit tough to because he's not a materialist, and I'd have to look into that more. I always think of the idea that there are concepts and abstractions, and maybe that's what people think of as unmaterial. But to me, ultimately, they're in the mind and or in the brain, and so it's it's still somewhat material. But maybe I should relook at my concept of what material means, because I definitely believe in concepts and abstractions as being of a different character as um, like atoms and you know, physical um, touchable materials. Like you can't really touch concepts, but I guess I rationalize my materials thinking by saying, well, you can draw them, write them, and think them, and thinking is material. You think inside your head, and there are uh, atoms and neurons and clusters of brain cells that make that happen, and that's all material. So I believe that there generally just is material stuff out there, but concepts are um, are difficult to um, to identify as something material. But that's my own problem, I suppose. I wanted to watch this other video real quick, which is something that Neil deGrasse Tyson said.
Do you remember the shooter in the University of Texas at Austin?
I remember that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a movie they made out of it called The Tower.
Yeah.
Where he left a note saying, "I just want to kill people. Something must be wrong with my brain. Please, when I die,
look into this."
They looked, and there was a tumor putting pressure on a part of the. In fact, that's how we learn anything about how the brain works when you have situations like this.
Person had the free will to write a note. He had the free will to write the note. So he did not have the will to resist shooting. But that's the line that you were talking about is a partial one.
Why isn't that line always in motion as we learn more and more about how the mind works?
It is.
Okay, so then maybe it's a line of convenience today, but tomorrow we're going to find out, oh my gosh, that person has no real free control over their behavior, over their personality, over their tendencies, over their treatment of others.
It's not a line of convenience. It is, in your words, a perimeter of ignorance. When Newton said we couldn't explain certain things, right? God must have done it.
Of course.
That's a God of the gaps.
Of course.
That delineates what we don't know. The line you describe, I hope, is in fact that perimeter of ignorance which we slowly are moving toward and moving so that we do understand what the true nature of free will is.
So this is where people will push back. Most people are concerned not about the actions, but the consequences.
Actually, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put this in the background while I talk. This is my photos, so why not? So there's this notion that we don't have free will because of external forces or even internal uncontrollable things, and I think that that's that type of refutation of free will is only comes about because they don't have a very good definition of free will. And if you think free will is just everyone is always in control of everything they do, or all the important things they do, or whatever, then that's just not what I think of as free will. Because from my internal personal experiences, there are tons of things that I don't necessarily have control over, and there are instinctual things that I feel and that I act on, and there are reactions, and there are split-second decision making, and a lot of what I do during the day is like that. But there are a ton of additional things that I do during the day that are not purely instinctual and not purely reactionary, and there is time for me to weigh pros and cons, and I do it all the time, and it's a certain amount of a lot of times I'm trying to think of like how to get the most out of my time, or how to navigate some location, or if I get up and do this, then it means I'm not going to be doing that, or if I get up and do this, like it's going to be cold in the other room, so I'm going to be quick about it, and maybe I'll wait a little bit so that the heater heats the room up. There's lots of modeling going on in my head that I'm trying to understand what is going to happen if I make different decisions, and at some point I choose an action, and I act on that, and I make that happen. And because I can't go back and make a different decision, it seems like there was no alternative to that outcome. But why not? Why can't there be a situation in which um, I can believe that I could have done something different? Um, and so I think that the idea that it's also the idea that everything is either perfectly free or it's determined. It's like, no, lots of things have limitations and are affected um, by all sorts of things, by external causes and external events. But why can't I take responsibility for choosing to do something over another thing if I have options? And the amount of freedom you have is the amount of freedom you have to do things, and the amount of freedom you have to not do things. Freedom from and freedom to. Um, so I like um, thinking of that. Now, I also have a notion of a free will mechanism that goes farther into the future, which is the decision to train yourself to do things automatically. So when you learn a new skill, some of the discomfort comes from the large amounts of little decisions you have to make to be disciplined, to make yourself do things, and to set time aside to do things. So if you want to learn to play the piano, um, if you actually end up learning to play the piano, the only way you can really do that is by making little decisions, and by engaging in that type of free will, you at some point become so practiced at that behavior that you are not really engaging free will as much anymore, because you've created an system. You've automatized the act of playing a particular song, and then you can essentially do it without making decisions. You trained yourself to do that. And I think that in exercising, you're not just deciding every day to go exercise even though you don't want to, because you reason the differences between going and not going. But you also, part of your reasoning is the potential long-term outlook. And the ability to look long-term as opposed to short-term is a variable that goes into decision making. And people who only act in the short term are, I think, not utilizing free will as much. They're not as disciplined, and they don't have enough information, or they're not capable of understanding the consequences of their actions, or they're much more controlled by emotion. There's like different reasons why people do things, and I think that when I um, when I rationally decide to lose weight for a multitude of reasons, and then I enact that, it feels like I could have just continued doing what I was doing, because that was instinctual. It was instinctual to just eat whatever I want, and to kind of not think about the future. And there was a time when I decided to care about myself more, and maybe not everything that goes into that was 100% intellectual, um, but it is mine. It's mine. I'm responsible for it. I could have done something else because I was able to weigh the consequences and make a decision, and and um, and that kind of discipline to continue doing those things um, requires some amount of effort and the start of a new causal chain, I think. Um, but over time, as you exercise regularly, you train yourself to just do it with less decision making and less thinking. You make it automatic, and I'm responsible for that as well. I'm also responsible for a lot of the automatic things that I do, because I could have slowed down, weighed the consequences, and tried to understand how things work better. And there's this notion of you're the kind of person who does those things, but there's no evidence to show that the kind of person I am is not due to the decisions I've made to enact behavior that makes me the kind of person I want to be. And what makes me want to be those things is another aspect um, of the understanding of potential consequences, long-term thinking, and um, and it's pretty complicated. But I think that similar to the idea of consciousness being real, embedded in consciousness is the ability to think, rationalize, decide, integrate information, model the world, and I think that those go hand in hand. Like, what's the point of consciousness if there's no free will to utilize consciousness as a mechanism um, for altering the future? And because the future is not determined, although it is somewhat predictable, sometimes, I mean, we're not that great at predicting the future. It's really difficult to predict the future in any real absolute way, especially when it comes to your, like, human behavior, like very complicated. Like economics tries to predict the future all the time and gets it wrong all the time. Weather, it's pretty reliable, the weather predictions, but still not perfect. Like, if there's so much determinism happening and that's really what's going on, why isn't the future so easy to figure out? And if it's just a lack of information, then is that information attainable? And if it's not, then again, we can't determine it, because determining presumes a agent that is in control, um, because of the word determined. Now, if it's just a matter of physical forces that can't be influenced and manipulated by minds, then that would be a kind of, I guess it's causal determinism, but I guess I'm trying to think of it objectively. Like, if there were no people, what is the point of being determined? But I guess without people, what's the point of any of it? Anyway, just some thoughts. I'm just thinking out loud, talking and thinking and talking. And so if free will is a thing that matters and can be justified, theorized, measured, then I think it's important to have ways of doing that, and not just saying it's the way I feel, even though a lot of it is. But I also think that if determinism is the case, then it definitely puts a lot of doubt into what's going on inside my head when I'm weighing and choosing. Like, is that all an illusion? And if so, then it has implications for my identity. So anyway, that's going to do it. Just a long diatribe about different things. But thanks for watching, and have a good one.